There are not 100 people in America who hate the Catholic Church, but there are millions of people who hate what they wrongly perceive the Catholic Church to be. This is a quote from Venerable Bishop Fulton Sheen. He was a wonderful priest and bishop in America, and his biggest legacy was trying to save even a single soul by dismantling what people believed about Catholicism, wrongly so. I want people to know that I'm not coming from a place of just simple ignorance about the Catholic faith before I converted. I was on quite the journey to pull people out of the Catholic religion and to try to make people believe that it wasn't just wrong, but it was actually evil. And so the stakes are high for my conversion story, and I want that to be understood at the outset. I also want to preface my story today with just a couple of points. If you're Catholic, these points hopefully just serve to solidify your faith a little bit more. But if you're coming from a different tradition, a different angle, such as Protestantism, or even Orthodoxy, I hope that these points make you think. I hope these are thought-provoking in a healthy way to maybe encourage some ongoing dialogue in your faith, a little bit more critical thinking as you discover your faith in a deeper way. The first point I want to make at the outset of this video is we need to understand that the devil obscures what is beautiful by making us think that it is an obstacle to God. I mean, he's been doing this from day one. Think of the garden, right, in the beginning. God tells Adam and Eve that they can eat from any tree in the garden except for the one, right, the one tree. And Satan tries to twist that. Instead of seeing it as a gift to be given such an abundance of fruit and food, right, they are then tricked to focus on the one tree that they can't touch. Satan makes them think that this is an obstacle to God. The fact that they cannot have access to one tree is an obstacle to their Heavenly Father. Satan is not doing anything new thousands of years later. Okay, so he's a filthy liar, right? And one of his biggest tricks, I firmly believe, is to get us to believe, once again, that something beautiful is not only an obstacle to God, but sometimes even further than that, that it's actually disgusting, that it's horrific, that we shouldn't even look at it because it's so profane. This is what I believe he has successfully done in stirring the spirit of anti-Catholicism in the world, but specifically in America. America does tend to be more anti-Catholic than other spots in the world. Looking back from the other side of my conversion now as a Catholic, I firmly believe that anti-Catholicism is a demonic spirit. I do not say things lightly. I take my words seriously, and I mean that. And I'm hoping that through the course of this podcast, through the course of this channel, you can see that Satan has ultimately claimed a huge victory. His victories are obviously limited, but I do think he's been incredibly successful in spreading lies about what is good and beautiful, to get people out of truth, to keep people stuck in the darkness. And so I want you to think about that. The next point is I want you just to realize what, and this specifically would appeal to Protestants, what the name Protestant means. It is to protest, okay? So for me at least, it was interesting to realize that my entire life within a Christian tradition was planted in this idea of protesting. I'm protesting something. What is that? The Catholic Church, okay? So to be a Protestant is to protest the Catholic Church and Orthodoxy at that. And so I want you to realize that you are protesting, even if you don't think about it in your day-to-day. It doesn't come through all the time, on the ground running within your Christian tradition. You are protesting the Catholic faith. The point I'm trying to make is that anti-Catholicism, right, a protest against Catholicism, is inherently woven into the very fabric of Protestantism. And so you might be anti-Catholic and there's a spectrum. There is definitely a spectrum. but you very well could be anti-Catholic without even knowing it. And then, of course, there are Protestants who are proudly anti-Catholic, which is what I was, who make it their mission to destroy the Catholic Church, to spread, honestly, heresy and mistruths about the Catholic religion in the name of Jesus Christ. And some ignorantly do this. They firmly believe they're correct. Others, I do think, are prideful, and I think they know what they're doing. I was probably the latter. As I share my story today, I just want you to think, what if everything that you've ever been told about the Catholic Church, what it teaches, what it believes, what Catholics are over there thinking, was a lie? I'm going to be as bold as to say it's true. I mean, most likely everything you think you know about the Catholic Church is a lie. If you're, of course, on the other side of it, the protesting side. Wouldn't that make you upset if you knew you were being lied to? So I just want you to think about that. And last is an image. I want you to imagine Christ standing at the other side of a door. The door is closed, but there's you, the door, and Christ. And on the other side of that door is Jesus, and he has prepared a feast. Okay, and there's the saints. All the saints are sitting around the table. All the apostles, disciples. There's a spot for you with your name on the little card on the table. And the door is unlocked, but you can't open the door because Satan is standing in the way, blocking off access for you to open the door. Just sit with that image for a minute. There's so much good and beauty on the other side, but you can't get to the other side because the devil is in the way. I don't want to say entire life as a Protestant, but at least the latter 5 years of my Protestant journey was that image. Okay. The devil eventually got out of the way, and I was able to go through the door into fullness. I'm excited to share my story with you. Keep listening if you're interested. Welcome back to my channel. I am Sophia, your host. This is the Catholic Chronicles. If you think you'll be interested in this channel and you'd like to follow along, please think about subscribing. I will link the podcast below. Today I'm going to share my story. How on earth did an anti-Catholic Protestant who used to rip rosaries, break statues. Now, I didn't do this all the time, but there was a concentrated period of my life where I was doing these things kind of ritualistically. Okay, so how does that person now stand happily and securely in the Catholic faith? Because that's what happened. I'm going to paint that picture for you today. But I am inclined to answer it is nothing short of a miraculous intervention of God. Some would say kind of a Saul to a Paul moment. And looking back, that is exactly what I believe occurred. So let's walk through what happened, right? Where did it start? So I was baptized as a baby in the Lutheran tradition. I grew up nominally Protestant, so, nothing crazy. Lukewarm Christianity. We went to church on Sundays, skipped a few here and there. Easter, Christmas obviously were important, but it didn't really mean much to me. Parents got divorced when I was around, and pardon me, I might butcher some of these dates. I was around 10, and my parents divorced. And my mom kind of had a revelation of faith in her life. And obviously me being a younger teenager went along with her. Where she went to church is where I went to church. And so I got plugged in pretty quickly in my early teenage years to the Evangelical free tradition. Non-denominational, evangelical free, they kind of run together, but that was the tradition of Protestantism that I was planted in, or more narrowly, Baptist Christianity, because you'll find really quickly that in a non-denominational church, the theology is Baptist 99% of the time. So believers' baptism, Baptism doesn't save, it's just a symbol. You profess that you're saved, right, with Christ. You have usually a saving moment you can point to. You get baptized as an outward sign of that. I want to just quick pause and pay homage to my history as a Baptist. Being raised in the Evangelical Free Church was a gift. Believe it or not, I see it as a massive gift. My faith was formed extremely well through the churches I attended. My mom was extremely pivotal in my faith, and I believe that I got to know Christ in a very amazing, deep way because of the influence that that branch of Protestantism had on my life. I'm just here to share my story and share the truth about what I came to discover. So anyway, sidetrack. I ended up getting saved is the verbiage that I would use when I was about 12 or 13, rough numbers. I was at a high school Christian conference. They had a moment of, the glorious emotional music playing. The pastor was down center stage, calling people to come have saving faith in Christ. And so I did that. And that was my saving moment. If you would have asked me at any point in my Protestant journey, that would be what I would say was, I got saved when I was 12, end of story. Typical high school things, I would stray away from my faith and then get, on fire again. I'd go to a conference and become totally on fire again for Christ. And then it would wane a little bit. And all that to say, my faith was really, and I don't speak for all Protestants, but typically in a lower church, Baptist traditions, it is a lot of emotionalism that kind of steers your faith. I would base a lot of times how I was doing with Christ based on how kind of emotional I felt towards him. If worship music was really good on a Sunday, that was great. My faith would be really strong that week, versus if it wasn't, etc. Might be an overshot there. But me personally, my faith was very emotional, which is good sometimes. I'm not knocking the emotional aspect of our faith. It should be, I think, emotional at times. It's an emotional matter. Christ died for us, right? It really did run my life. And I felt like at some point in my Protestantism, I had to get as close to Christ as I could. And the only way to do that was to take on more and more and more and more Christian things in my life. What that looks like practically, or looked like, was leading Bible studies, right? Stretching myself so thin in organizations where I was leading Bible studies. I was writing devotionals for people to read. I was going on mission trips. I was going door to door sharing the gospel. I would go to all these conferences and extracurriculars within the church. And a lot of that is great, but that was definitely the springboard of which I used to get to God. I would have said at the time that absolutely I am saved by Christ alone, no question. Nothing I do can save me. But looking back, I was definitely striving within the evangelical world. I have to be a super strong Christian, right? Because I'm doing all these things. And so that's kind of how my faith was. Skip forward, college, I went to Australia, had a amazing experience, mission trip there, sharing the gospel on the streets to people sitting on benches. I mean, it was wonderful. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. People who didn't know anything about Christ now had the gospel told to them, and that is beautiful and wonderful. That was probably the pivotal part of my evangelical journey. So I've given you the history, very, very deep into my faith. I had believers' baptism, lots of mission trips, Bible studies, involved in a lot of the things within evangelicalism. And that was just kind of my life. That's that. Next portion of my story is now where the anti-Catholicism specifically comes in. Where does that rhetoric enter my life? Well, I would say it is, and I said this earlier, it is just inherently there in the fabric of Protestantism. You are a Protestant, therefore you are protesting Catholicism. You can't separate those two realities. Again, a lot of churches out there in the Protestant world are not actively protesting the Catholic Church, okay? Some don't even realize they do. But then you have the subset of Protestants, specifically within the Baptist traditions, fundamental Baptists especially, dispensationalism. That world is very anti-Catholic. And so really around the age of, I would say 20 to 24-ish was kind of the bulk of my anti-Catholicism. unbeknownst to me at the time, was reading Bible studies that were really anti-Catholic. I had a certain study Bible that was very anti-Catholic, I now realize, in the notes at the bottom. Just kind of starting to absorb this anti-Catholic literature without even realizing I was. So starting to think, oh wow, these Catholics really have it wrong, and so I often say it was this period initially of, oh, these poor Catholics. It wasn't like I hated the Catholic Church. I didn't hate them. I didn't have any strong feelings, but it was like, oh, they're so lost and they don't even know it. And I argue that's what a lot of Protestants are walking around thinking. You have this world of Catholics over here. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they think. They don't even know what they believe in. They're just so lost, and we need to bring them home into the fold of the gospel, the true, pure, simple gospel, right? That is kind of the message that really heightened when I was part of Cru. So Campus Crusades for Christ, it is a great organization. It's doing wonderful things. They claim to be interdenominational. I just don't think that's true on the ground running. It is very Protestant in nature. But a lot of times when we would share the gospel, we would put emphasis on sharing with Catholics, right? To try to kind of get them away from their busyness of Catholic theology and, again, back to the simple gospel that we had the answer to in Protestantism. So that kind of really birthed the anti-Catholic beginnings of my full-fledged anti-Catholicism that came later. Somebody then comes into my life around the age of 21, 22, who exposes me to fiery anti-Catholicism for the first time. Now I'm starting to shift from, oh, Catholics kind of don't have the whole picture, to, okay, Catholics are in a satanic institution. Okay, so the Catholic Church is kind of a little weird. Now is switching over to the thought of the Catholic Church is actually really evil, and it's not just weird and a little off, it's actually Satan's tool in the world to pull people away from Christ. This person is introducing me to literature, such as Dave Hunt's The Woman Rides the Beast. I'm not going to go into all the details of these books here because it would take forever. But essentially, now I can say these books are garbage. It's just an echo chamber of the same anti-Catholic rhetoric from the Protestant Reformation, just painted in different ways. But that kind of whoa, this is a book claiming that the Catholic Church is the Antichrist, or the Pope is the Antichrist, etc., etc. And then I'm reading, things by Mike Gendron. Again, if you don't know who these people are, it doesn't really add too much to my story. You don't have to worry about it, but you can look it up and get kind of the rundown. I'm reading these things. I'm reading these things before bed. I'm listening to podcasts. Then I'm introduced to James White, Mike Winger, and now I am getting this, at the time, what I believed was this robust theology to argue away Catholics, to argue people into my Protestant tradition. Now my apologetic era kind of awakens in my faith, and I'm finding joy in learning all of the ways to argue well, ways to contend, right? Getting into theology, that kind of wave of my Protestant journey is now occurring, where it's not just emotionalism now, it's critical thinking. And I'm not saying that Protestants don't critically think. In my little world of evangelicalism, it was, well, just believe in Christ and clap our hands and it's all good. So that shift starts to occur. That sets the stage, right? So that's kind of what I'm believing and thinking as I meet my now husband, Garrett. Garrett comes into my life. And then as we start really talking and getting to know one another, I learn that he's Catholic. Oh no. But in my head, I'm like, he's just another nominal Catholic walking around, doesn't actually know what he thinks he knows, and I'm going to blow him out of the water with my knowledge of why his church is so awful and evil, and I'm going to pull him right into my evangelical church. Okay. Our relationship is kind of getting off to a nasty start because we are having some hot debates. And I quickly come to realize that Garrett is not just your nominal Catholic. He is a versed Catholic who practices his Catholicism, and he takes it very seriously. And he's raising objections that no one has ever raised to me before about my beliefs. And so this causes me to bury myself in anti-Catholic apologetics even deeper. So I'm ordering more books. I'm talking to pastors. I'm listening to all of the James Whites you can possibly listen to on every social media platform you can get your hands on. Listening to audiobooks. I am taking all of this in even more now. It was almost an obsession. So then I would try to corner him in our conversations. And I would say, some sort of apologetic jargon. Here, read this verse. Clearly it's just whatever, throwing again anti-Catholicism is usually the same like 5 lies used over and over again, but said in different ways each time. So at the root of these anti-Catholic arguments are usually the same 5 points that anti-Catholics have been making since the 16th century. Nothing new. Just like when the devil obscures beauty, he uses no new tactics. He uses the same old tactics, just in different ways. I'm going to try to skip forward a little bit. We break up for a period of time because clearly we're both digging our heels into our Christian traditions. Nobody is going to change. A series of events happen. We end up getting back together in the future. So happy we did. Looking back, that was definitely the hand of God. But next time, I came in guns a-blazing, and I was actually able to successfully argue my husband out of the Catholic faith. He started to attend church with me. And I quickly noticed that my husband, because again, skip forward, lacking some details, we ended up getting married. I noticed that he was now having panic attacks on the regular, which he had never, he was one of the most relaxed, chill guys I have ever met before this. And then it's like he gets saved, right? And he's going to church with me, and he's all of a sudden having to leave mid-service because he's having panic attacks. And this went on. So then that's happening. And a lot of things in my story are like running parallel to one another. And so it's hard sometimes for me to chronologically break things down because it wasn't exactly chronological. It was like all of these things and pieces were happening in parallel. God was using a bunch of different things at the same time to kind of propel me into the Catholic Church the whole time. Sometimes my story can sound a little like back and forth and confusing and skipping around, but really I'm trying my best to consolidate all of these things that happened because it's truly wild. Anyway, we were settling down, we were building our life on our own, and we were our happy evangelical Baptist selves. But I always was thinking in the back of my head that it was odd that he was getting panic attacks at church on Sunday. Skip forward a couple months. God comes in to my life in the most radical, earth-shattering way. And I really mean that. When I say my life was flipped upside down, everything I knew or thought that I knew was unraveled. If you've ever had like a deconstruction with a belief system, it's one of the scariest things that you'll ever go through. This was the start now of my deconstructing of my Protestantism. You have to remember at this point, I am proud in my anti-Catholic journey. I'm proud. We know that God humbles the prideful. I'm not sure how I was thinking that would end up, but I was in the heights of my pride, and then I came crashing down on my face because one night it was actually something quite simple. I was scrolling on Instagram, and really I at that time had curated my social media to be like this Protestant anti-Catholic apologetic bubble. Okay. So I never would even think about coming across Catholic post or something. Somehow there's a story bubble on Instagram, and it is from this person I went to college with. Didn't really know her, but followed her on Instagram. And she had just simply posted, and this is just the humor of God and how God works in simple ways. It was just a quote that she reposted by John Henry Newman, Cardinal John Henry Newman. And it was to be deep in history is to cease being a Protestant. And I don't know what it was about that quote, but it immediately took root in my soul and bothered the absolute life out of me for the next year and a half. That was truly the impetus of my deconstruction of my Protestant life, that quote. I let it go for a couple weeks, but it's in the back of my head. It is gnawing away at me every day. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, but that's such an odd quote, and I've never heard it said before. I've never heard somebody bring like the historical aspect to faith, and nobody's really in my Protestant bubble ever encouraged me to look at history. My idea of history, my idea of church history, started in the 16th century with Martin Luther and John Calvin and Yerk Zwingli, and that was that. The Bible, truly, the Bible fell out of the sky in my hands. I never questioned where did I get my Bible from. Before this, I never questioned where my evangelical church came from. And all of a sudden it dawns on me, like, that's weird. It's a little interesting that I've never, ever questioned why I am, of all the things I could be, even within Protestantism, why am I Baptist? Why is my theology Baptist? Where did my church service come from on Sunday? Where for the first time, I am exposed to history, the idea of history within the Christian life. And I didn't know how to marry that with my happy-go-lucky evangelical self. I'm just in the here and now, worshiping on Sunday, reading my Bible, having quiet time, and sharing the gospel. I've never been told to think about anything different. Okay. So I finally cannot deal with that quote anymore. I can't deal with just letting it sit there anymore. So I looked that up, a simple Google search. I typed the quote in one Saturday morning, and a whole slew of quotes and stuff. Okay, Catholic articles comes up. Never even heard of Catholic apologetics, which is so funny because I was so confident that I knew what those Catholics thought, right? And I could argue them to the ground any day because I was just putting myself in this echo chamber of anti-Catholic arguments. Never actually listened to the other side. And I wonder how many people do this with anything, really. But I wonder how many of us stay in our happy little echo chambers and never question what's on the outside of it. It is a grace, I believe, to come to a point where you're ready to question that, but it's not comfortable at the time, certainly. So I am now exposed to something called the Church Fathers. Never in my Protestant journey has Church Fathers, just as a thing, ever even come up. Fathers of who, what? So I'm like kind of awkwardly pushed into this whole terrifying world of church history by that one quote, because guess what? Once you learn that there's these guys called the Church Fathers that existed in the first centuries after Christ's ascension that were doing church and doing it pretty unanimously and had thousands upon hundreds of thousands of pages of writings about how church was done and what people believed. And once you learn that trove of information exists, you have two options. You can either consciously decide to be ignorant and shove that away and never look at it and just live on in your blissful ignorance, or you have to dive in. There's really no in between. I've never met somebody who can just read a church father once a year and not have any cognitive dissonance or think about why they believe what they believe, etc. You have to make that decision right then and there. And that was what I think that is the decision God placed in my life by seeing that quote on Instagram. If I would have never seen that quote, I don't know if I would have ever looked. Now I'm starting to read the Church Fathers. I'm literally waking up at 2, 3 a.m., sneaking downstairs and reading the Church Fathers on the internet for hours, not sleeping. This is where, in the beginning of the video, I had said I firmly believe that anti-Catholicism is a demonic spirit, because if I just look at what occurred in this time, almost like God was performing an exorcism on me. That might sound weird, but angels and demons are real, and I'm not ashamed of saying that. So I would be reading the Church Fathers on my computer in this hand, and then I would have a trash can right here, and I would be vomiting as I was reading the Church Fathers. You can think of that what you want. but it would be every time. Every time I would read the Church Fathers, I would throw up. I skipped school. I got almost a leave of absence. I would miss days and days at a time. I was in and out of doctor's offices asking for Xanax and pills because I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't eat. I lost a lot of weight. I could not. It was the most traumatic thing to see my Protestantism deconstructed in front of my face. And I was so angry that I saw that quote, because I would always say to myself, if I never would have been on Instagram that night and I never would have seen that quote, this wouldn't be happening. But again, God works in funny ways. And so I would read through church documents. So basically, again, and here I go into the nitty gritty again, but to take a broad brush approach, I learned very quickly, and I say this with a lot of precision, there is not a single thing in my current day evangelical Sunday church service happening in the early church. There could not be more worlds apart. The early church was worshiping in a fashion that is identical to the way that Catholics worship today. And that was severely, severely soul-shattering for me. I did not want to leave my evangelical way. But I quickly came to realize that the early church was so astronomically different from what I was currently doing that the cognitive dissonance was so heavy that I would vomit. My husband can attest to all of this. He actually had to hide my computer because I would be sneaking it and reading it and not sleeping. I would be skipping school to read Church Fathers. It was horrible. So the first thing I'm realizing is, okay, it was almost like a series of process of elimination as I read the Church Fathers, because the number one thing I learned right away, two things. Number one is it was unanimous in the early church, and honestly for the first 2,000 years of Christianity until the Protestant Reformation, truly, that baptism saved. So if that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize. I really do. But that is just the unanimous thought of the church for centuries. And so I'm realizing, okay, baptism saves. Everyone thought this forever. I mean, since the beginning, and now I see it very obviously in Scripture. But there was not a single person who was doing church for thousands of years who ever thought that the waters of baptism did not save your soul, that was not the way you got saved. And here I was today in the 20th century, 21st century, teaching people passionately that baptism does not save you, that it's just a symbol. And so it started to dawn on me, who am I to say that I know what the scriptures mean thousands of years later from these guys who were doing church not even 100 years removed from the apostles in Christ? And I started to realize that my pride had really gotten in the way of me being rational about these things. And I had to give it up. And so the first thing that I made a decision in, because it was never, okay, I'm going to be Catholic. It was always inching, there. But God forbid I be Catholic, but I'll inch away from evangelicalism, sure. So the next best thing. So I knew the first thing I learned was by process of elimination, I cannot remain Baptist, because this whole baptism saves thing is the most clear thing that the church has believed for all time before. I mean, even the Protestant reformers, even the major Protestant reformers believed in baptismal regeneration. Okay, it is not until later in the Reformation that people started introducing the idea that it doesn't save you, the Anabaptists. So it's not even like the Protestant Reformation came in and all the guys were unanimously yes, we are. No, Baptist theology is uniquely new compared to even the earliest Protestant reformers. So, okay, that left me with Lutheranism, Anglicanism or Presbyterian because they baptize babies, but they don't believe it saves. But I was open to nuances. And so slowly moved away from my evangelical world, was becoming more content with the idea of more traditional Protestantism, a little bit more high church in my life. I was becoming okay with that. But still, Catholicism was the big ugly beast, and I would not dare look it in the face. So anyway, I'm meeting with multiple actually, but I would meet with this church historian pastor. He had a degree in church history, and I would meet with him for hours on the weekly basis. And I would ask really hard questions like, well, how do we square this? Why are we, playing the drums and the piano and the electric guitar and having strobe lights, and this is worship when like for 2,000 years it was like this reverent, hymns, maybe an organ, but usually just like schola choir, and we were doing there was the Lord's Supper every single week. Like why are we so different? And the answers I would get were so dry. Here's this church historian saying essentially, I don't really know. But it's just what we do. And that was not satisfying for me. And so I slowly moved away, further and further away from my evangelical fortress and into more high church churches. And so it was Anglican churches, it was Episcopalian, if you're wondering, Lutheran churches. We would bounce. And my poor husband is like, I just converted. What are we doing? The confusion that it must have sowed in his life. I repented for that now, but I'm taking him along for this wild journey. And now looking back, God has a funny way of doing things, but it's like my husband gets saved. It's all good. And now Sophia's questioning everything. So anyway, still reading the church fathers, I'm having Christian friends who I love to this day, but I'm essentially, bringing these things to them. Hey, look at this paragraph that this church father says. The Eucharist is a sacrifice. We have a mass, right? There's a priesthood functioning very early on in the early church. What do you think about that? I'm like running to my Protestant friends for reassurance constantly, almost obsessively. And honestly, the answers I would get is like, well, most of them didn't know what I was talking. They didn't know what church history even was or what church fathers were. Who are they? Like, what are you talking about? Who are the church fathers? And the more I ran to them for comfort, the more frustrated I became with my Protestant tradition. Because I'm like, nobody knows about this. Nobody in my Protestant world knows about this. Why did no one ever tell me to look beyond the Protestant Reformation? That was sketchy to me, to be frank. So I kind of was feeling like I was on an island. I was almost like shunned for looking at the church fathers. I felt like I would have pastors say to me, like, don't even go there. Do not read them. They're not even worth it. And this is why I said in the beginning of this video that one of the strongest tools Satan has is to make us think that something beautiful is actually an obstacle. Because as I'm puking and I'm vomiting into a bucket while I'm reading about the Eucharistic sacrifice, the sacrifice of the Mass in like 200 AD, even before that, and I'm vomiting. And then I'm reading more about the Mass and I'm vomiting. It's like God was pulling that junk, that lie out of my soul, little by little, until eventually that reaction, that visceral reaction that I had while reading the church fathers slowly melted away. And then it went to this experience of joy while I read them. I couldn't explain it, but that shift occurred. And it was like, now I'm reading the church fathers and I am hungering for the things of the early church. I'm hungering for a Eucharist. And I'm starting to read the Bible again in the light of the church. And I'm like, Jesus clearly tells us that this is truly the flesh and blood of himself that we're receiving. And I'm like arguing it away that he didn't really mean what he meant this whole time as a Protestant. And now it's like, oh, what a gift. And I often say, as a Protestant, especially within anti-Catholicism, you're led to believe that all of the sacraments and these things of the Catholic Church are obstacles to Christ. That is the lie. But on that other side, they're actually the greatest gifts that he could have given us. And so I started to realize, oh, God, the Father who made my five senses actually wants to like appeal to them and use them in Christian worship. What? And now it's making sense. So of course. And now everything that I used to think was silly, sacramentalism, a priesthood, sacrifice being at the heart of worship, because newsflash, that is what worship is in every single religion in the world. It's not just praise. It's not just singing. It's actually sacrifice. And I'm starting to realize these things don't sound so silly anymore. These things actually don't sound like obstacles and weirdness obscuring my path to heaven. These things actually sound like the greatest gifts known to mankind. I understand I need to wrap this up. So practically, how did this end? This whole process as a whole was about 1.5 years, I would say, process from the beginning of being exposed to that quote about church history to now being in the church. So I'm wrapping up my church history study. I'm in Lutheran catechesis. This is last summer. I'm super pumped about the idea of a Eucharist, right? So that's like the biggest thing that transformed in my heart was a need and a want and a desire for the Eucharist. All of a sudden, my husband sits me down one day out of nowhere, and he says, I need to go back to the Catholic Church. And you can either come with me and trust the process, or you can stay, Protestant, but this is what I need to do. And in that moment, I had already been really considering making the jump at that point, but I was going to try Lutheranism first. Why not? But in that moment, every last shred of resistance fell away, and I hungered for the Catholic Church in that moment. And so I said, okay, this is clearly the Lord trying to push me into that final step into becoming Catholic. So I trusted my husband, and I said, I'll try it. Began RCIA, and was eventually initiated or confirmed into the church All Saints Day of 2023. And now I'm here. I'm happily Catholic. I'm raising my family Catholic, very confident about being Catholic. And so that's that. Radical heart change, you guys. My heart went from I hate everything about the Catholic Church to I crave everything the Catholic Church has. And that door was open. Satan got out of the way. God removed him from my path. He allowed me to deconstruct my belief system to then build up the true belief system, which is Catholicism. Again, Bishop Fulton Sheen. There are not 100 people who hate the Catholic Church, but there are millions who hate what they perceive wrongly the Catholic Church to be. I was one of those million people. I was tragically wrong for too long about the Catholic Church. And I often say I gained absolutely, from a worldly perspective, let's just talk about in the secular, I gained nothing becoming a Catholic. I lost a lot. I lost friends. I have people on the daily, who knew me in my Protestant world looking at me like I have 5 heads. Like, what are you doing? What an idiot. My reputation plummeted in my evangelical circle. I hurt the feelings of my mom a lot. I mean, my mom's heart broke when I told her. It severed relationships for a while. I mean, I really didn't gain anything in the world. I lost a lot. But I gained heaven. I got to walk through that door and sit at the banquet feast of Christ. And so, don't let it be you. Don't let it be you. Don't let the enemy have a seat at your table anymore and tell you these lies. In all of my years of reading anti-Catholic literature, listening to anti-Catholic podcasts, arguing away on social media and Twitter and whatever else. Not once in those years did I open up a catechism. Hilariously enough. Now, if you're arguing against the Catholic Church and you at least have a catechism in front of you and you're actually representing the Catholic belief well, I applaud you. Those are the kinds of conversations I want to have. People who are doing those things. But I was just regurgitating the lies that were sown in the 16th century in the Reformation. And I quickly realized that everything that was wrong, because there were things wrong, everything that was wrong with the Catholic Church at that time was actually fixed in the Counter-Reformation Council of Trent in the Catholic Church. Could it be that God used the Protestant Reformation to reform the church that was already in existence for 2,000 years? But then perhaps the enemy ran with the seeds of division that were sown from the reformers. And now that is why we have, 20,000 plus denominations of Protestant Christianity, and nobody can tell you exactly what the Bible means. At some point, I had to realize that Christ was mighty enough to establish an enduring church. One body. One body. Not thousands. One. And that is the Catholic Church. And so I highly recommend you pray, first of all. But if you're not a Catholic, if you're realizing listening to this that you've been told lies, that you've been told, and usually they'll go something like this. Catholics worship Mary. Catholics say Christ is re-sacrificed at every Mass. Catholics believe that only priests can forgive their sins and God can't. Catholics, but whatever. That is the echo chamber of anti-Catholic rhetoric that you're in. And hopefully you will prayerfully consider opening up a catechism to see for yourself, or take a stroll in the world of the Church Fathers for just a day. Just Google some of them and read Ignatius of Antioch. Read St. Cyril. Read Clement of Rome. Read just for an hour. And if you start to have cognitive dissonance, that is a grace, because God wants you to be in the fold of the church that has always been in existence from the beginning of time. And so, yes, I went from hating the Catholic Church with a passion to realizing it is the greatest gift in the world. I often say it's like digging through a treasure chest and picking out a new gem every day. I learn something new, and I think I'll be learning something new until the day I die. But I'm home, and I'm in the church. I'm with the church that has existed for 2,000 plus years. I'm home in that church. That continuity, right? No more splintering, no more division. I am safe and nestled in the boat. A lot of times I see the Catholic Church as like a boat in a stormy sea, and lots of people will dive off and try to, sail their way to shore. But if only you would just stay in the boat, because it's going to make it. I'm at peace now. And I'm finally at the other side of that door at the banquet feast. So with that, I will end this video. Thank you so much for watching. And please keep me in your prayers, and I will as well. And I'll see you on our next episode of the Catholic Chronicles. God bless.